Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we are traveling deep into the quiet back roads of Canada, into forgotten mining towns, frozen lake communities, and sleepy villages that hide secrets far darker than their postcard streets suggest. These are real accounts from people who were just trying to live ordinary lives, until something in their small town watched them, followed them, or decided they would never be allowed to feel safe again. As you listen, remember that these places are not faraway fantasies. They are the kinds of towns you might drive through on a weekend trip without ever knowing what really happened there after dark. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. My name is Lucas Hargreave, and this happened when I was 34. During the winter, I inherited my grandmother's house in a town called White Pine Crossing. White Pine Crossing sat along a frozen river in northern Canada, the kind of place people only stopped in because their car broke down or their fuel ran out. My grandmother had lived there her entire life, attending the same small stone church every Sunday without fail. When she passed, the house and her unanswered questions became mine. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not peaceful silence, heavy silence, as if the town was holding its breath. The second thing was the church. It stood at the edge of town, gray stone cracked with age, its steeple crooked like a broken finger pointing at the sky. No lights, no cars, no sign of activity. Yet every local I met avoided looking at it, their eyes drifting away as if pulled by instinct. On my first night, just after midnight, the church bells rang. Not once, not twice, but continuously. Slow, deliberate tolls that vibrated through the frozen ground and into my chest. I checked the time. 12:07 a.m. There were no scheduled services, no caretaker, no electricity running to the building. And yet, someone or something was ringing the bell. The bells stopped exactly at 12:13 a.m. 6 minutes. Always 6 minutes. I didn't sleep after that. Instead, I sat by the window, watching the church through drifting snow, half expecting to see movement. I saw none, but I felt watched, the way you do when someone stands just outside your field of vision. The next morning, I asked the woman at the general store about the bells. Her face drained of color. "They shouldn't be ringing for you yet," she said quietly. "For me?" I asked. She rang up my groceries without meeting my eyes. "If you hear them again, don't look outside. And whatever you do, don't answer the door afterward." That evening, I searched my grandmother's house for answers. In the basement, I found a wooden box filled with old church programs, each dated years apart, but all marked with the same handwritten note. 6 minutes. Pray they pass you by. That night, the bells rang again. 12:07 a.m. 6 minutes. This time, when they stopped, there was a knock at my front door. Slow, careful, reverent. I didn't open the door. I stood there, barely breathing, staring at the wood as the knocking continued. 3 slow taps, a pause, then 3 more. It wasn't forceful, wasn't angry. It sounded patient, like whoever stood outside knew I would eventually give in. A voice followed, not loud, not threatening. "Lucas," it said softly, "you're late." My blood turned cold. I hadn't told anyone my name. The voice sounded old, dry, like paper rubbing together. I backed away until my calves hit the couch. The knocking stopped, replaced by the faintest scraping sound, something being dragged across my porch. When I finally dared to look through the window, the porch was empty. No footprints, no marks, just snow, smooth and untouched. The next day, I drove to the church in daylight. Up close, it looked worse. Stone eroded, wooden doors warped, the bell rope cut clean through. Inside, the pews were coated in dust. But the aisle was worn smooth, as if hundreds of feet still walked it nightly. At the altar, carved into the stone, were dozens of names. Some were scratched out. Some were fresh. At the bottom, barely dried, Lucas Hargreave. I confronted the oldest man in town that afternoon, a widower named Thomas Bell, whose family had lived in White Pine Crossing longer than anyone else. He didn't deny anything. "The church doesn't call the faithful anymore," he said. "It calls the inherited." He explained that every few decades, someone tied by blood to the town hears the bells. The 6 minutes were not a warning, but a selection. "It needs a caretaker," Thomas said. "Someone to answer when others knock." "Answer what?" I demanded. He looked at me with pity. "The dead don't stay quiet here. The church keeps them organized." That night, the bells rang louder than before. The sound shook my walls, rattled my bones. When they stopped, the knock came again, this time from inside the house, from the basement door. My grandmother's voice whispered my name. "I kept it safe for you," she said. "Now it's your turn." The basement light flicked on by itself, and I understood. I hadn't inherited a house. I'd inherited a duty. I didn't go down into the basement that night. Instead, I sat on the edge of my bed until morning, listening to soft footsteps move through the house, slow, deliberate, respectful. Doors opened and closed gently. Floorboards creaked as if someone careful was walking, not wanting to wake me. Every sound carried the same unsettling intention. We are waiting. At dawn, I found the basement door standing open. Inside, the air was colder than the rest of the house, damp with the smell of old stone and candle wax. At the far wall stood a narrow wooden cabinet I had never noticed before. Inside it were black-bound ledgers, each filled with names, dates, and notes, written in my grandmother's careful handwriting. Next to some names were simple phrases: answered, refused, took too long. Every entry ended the same way, with a date exactly 6 minutes after midnight. My grandmother's final entry made my hands shake. "Lucas is kind. He will listen." That evening, people began knocking on my door before sunset. Strangers, some living, some not. All of them polite, all of them asking the same thing. "May we speak to the church?" The bells rang early that night. 11:58 p.m. They didn't stop. The sound swelled until it felt like the air itself was vibrating, pressing against my skull. Outside, I saw shapes moving through the snow. Figures gathering in silence, all facing the church. I followed them. The church doors opened easily, as if they'd been waiting. Inside, every pew was filled. Faces turned toward me, some pale and translucent, others solid and breathing. The dead sat among the living, perfectly still. The bell rope hung freshly repaired. When I touched it, the room fell silent. A voice rose from the congregation. "Caretaker," it said. "We have requests." They began standing one by one, speaking calmly about unfinished business, lost names, wrong graves. I realized then what the church truly was. Not a place of worship, but a filing system. A way to keep the restless from spilling into the world. As I listened, my fear shifted into something heavier. Responsibility. At 12:04 a.m., the bells stopped on their own. 6 minutes had passed, and the doors locked behind me. The first night I stayed inside the church, I learned what the bells truly measured. They weren't counting time. They were counting control. As midnight approached, the temperature dropped so fast, my breath fogged the air like smoke. The congregation returned silently, filing into their usual places. Some looked relieved to see me. Others looked disappointed, like gamblers who had lost a bet. A man in a torn winter coat stepped forward. He said his name was Daniel Price. He had drowned in the river 15 years earlier, but his body was buried under the wrong marker. Because of that mistake, he said, he couldn't rest. When I wrote his name into the ledger and rang the bell once, his form solidified. His breathing slowed. Then he vanished, leaving behind a damp footprint that faded into stone. That was when I understood the trade. Every name I corrected took something from me. My hands shook worse. My memories felt thinner. I struggled to remember my parents' faces without concentrating. By 12:06 a.m., the pews were empty. By 12:07, the bells rang on their own. I collapsed onto the altar, exhausted, knowing this was only the beginning. Days blurred together after that. I slept in the church, ate when I remembered, and wrote names until my fingers cramped. The townspeople avoided me now, not out of fear, but respect. They nodded when they passed, like parishioners acknowledging a priest who carried a burden they were grateful not to share. But something was wrong. New names appeared in the ledger without my writing them. Names of people who were still alive. I confronted Thomas Bell, my voice hoarse from disuse. He didn't deny it. The church balances itself, he said. Sometimes it needs to prepare. That night, I saw my own name written faintly at the bottom of a blank page, not scratched, not carved, waiting. The bells rang longer than 6 minutes. 7, 8, 9. With each toll, I felt lighter, less anchored to my body. When the final bell struck, the church doors opened, and I saw my grandmother standing in the aisle, whole and smiling. "You're ready," she said. "I can rest now." I realized the truth then. Caretakers don't retire. They are replaced. I tried to leave the church before midnight. That was my final mistake. The moment I stepped outside, the bells rang violently, no longer slow and patient, but furious. The sound punched through my chest, knocking the breath from my lungs. The snow around me began to fall upward, spiraling toward the steeple like it was being pulled by an invisible force. The townspeople stood at the edges of the square, watching. None of them moved to help. Their faces weren't cruel, they were relieved. I ran anyway. With every step away from the church, my legs grew heavier, my thoughts slower. Memories slipped through my fingers like melting ice. I forgot my childhood home, then my parents' voices, then the reason I was running at all. By the time I reached the road, I couldn't remember my own last name. A voice boomed from the bell tower, deep, layered, ancient. Caretaker does not abandon. The ground split open beneath me, stone replacing snow, and the church doors appeared where the road had been. I was standing at the altar again. The ledger lay open. My name was no longer faint. It was carved deep. I don't know how long it has been since I stopped resisting. Time doesn't move the same way here. Midnight arrives again and again, folding over itself like a prayer repeated too many times. The bells still ring, but now they ring for me, moving when I need them to, stopping when I ask. The ledger is heavy in my hands, its pages endless. New names appear every night, some familiar, some not yet born. I write them carefully, gently, the way my grandmother once did. I understand her kindness now. This is not punishment. This is containment. The dead knock less often. The living sleep more peacefully. White Pine Crossing survives because someone listens when the bells call. Sometimes, just before the final toll, I feel a pull. like I'm being invited to sit among the pews instead of standing at the altar. When that happens, I ring the bell once and remind myself why I must remain, because if I ever stop answering, the bells will ring for everyone. My name is Noah Bennett, and this happened when I was 31. During the summer, I worked as a seasonal ranger near a remote Canadian town called Coldwater Reach. Coldwater Reach existed on the edge of a massive glacial lake, so deep the locals claimed it had no bottom. The town survived on fishing and tourism, though no one ever swam there. Not even kids, not even drunks. The lake was treated less like water and more like a boundary. On my first day, the senior ranger, Elaine Mercer, gave me the usual safety briefing: wildlife, weather, emergency radios. Then she paused and added something that didn't fit. "If anyone goes into the lake," she said slowly, "you don't follow them. You mark the time." I laughed, thinking it was a joke. She didn't. The locals told stories quietly. Boats found drifting with engines running, fishing lines pulled taut as if hooked on something massive, then snapping. People who waved from the shore and were never seen again. That night, I stood at the dock watching fog crawl across the water like a living thing. The lake made no sound, no ripples, no insects dared skim its surface. Then I saw someone standing chest deep in the water, perfectly still, facing me. I called out. The figure didn't respond. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it across the water. The beam cut through the fog just enough to reveal a man, middle-aged, fully clothed, eyes open, but unfocused. His skin was pale, bloated, like he'd been submerged for days. Yet he was standing, not floating, standing. The waterline sat just below his shoulders, but the lake was known to drop sharply only a few feet from shore. He should have been sinking. Instead, he remained upright, unmoving, as if something beneath the surface was holding him there. I radioed Elaine, my voice shaking. She arrived within minutes, took one look, and quietly told me to turn off the light. "You look too long," she said. The man's head twitched slightly, tilting toward me. His mouth opened and bubbles rose, not from breathing, but from deep below him, as if the lake itself was exhaling. Elaine pulled me back. "That's not him anymore," she whispered. "The lake borrows shapes. It wants to be seen." As we retreated, I heard something shift beneath the dock, wood creaking under pressure from below. Then the water rippled for the first time, and the figure began to walk forward. Elaine locked the dock gate behind us, her hand steady despite the tremor in my own. We didn't look back. The fog swallowed the shoreline almost instantly, erasing the place where the man had been standing, as if the lake didn't want witnesses. Back at the ranger station, Elaine poured 2 cups of coffee we didn't drink. She spread out a faded map of the lake, its edges marked with red grease pencil circles and dates stretching back decades. "Cold water doesn't return what it takes," she said quietly. "It keeps them layered." She explained that every few years, someone went into the lake, by accident, by curiosity, or by despair. Their bodies were never recovered. Instead, they came back like what I had seen, standing just far enough out to be noticed, close enough to be recognized. "They're not calling for help," Elaine said. "They're measuring." That night, the station radio crackled on its own. Between bursts of static, I heard splashing. Slow, rhythmic, like footsteps through shallow water. When I stepped outside, wet footprints led from the direction of the lake, straight up to the station door. By morning, the town knew. No sirens, no panic. Just a collective tightening of faces. like everyone had silently agreed the rules were changing. Fishing boats stayed tied to the docks. Parents kept their kids inside. The lake sat smooth and dark, reflecting the sky like a sheet of black glass. Elaine showed me the incident logs, hundreds of names, most marked with the same phrase, "Observed standing." Some entries had notes added years later. Second appearance. Third appearance. Closer. She told me the lake tested how much attention it could draw without being challenged. The more people watched, the bolder it became. That afternoon, a boy went missing. He'd been skipping stones near the shore while his mother unloaded groceries. Less than a minute of silence. That was all it took. By the time they found his shoes at the water's edge, the fog had already started rolling in. At dusk, we saw him. He stood beside the drowned man from the night before, both figures aligned perfectly, eyes fixed on the town. Elaine whispered, "It's learning our shapes faster now." Behind them, the lake's surface bulged slightly, as if something vast beneath was shifting to get a better look. That night, the lake refused to stay quiet. From the ranger station, I heard water lapping against the shore in slow, deliberate pulses, even though the wind was dead still. Each sound carried weight, as if something massive was shifting its position beneath the surface. Elaine sat across from me, her eyes fixed on the radio, listening for patterns only she seemed to recognize. "The lake's never shown more than one at a time," she murmured. "Not until now." We watched through binoculars as the two figures remained standing in the water, unmoving, patient. The boy's head tilted slightly, mimicking the way his mother had tilted hers earlier that day while calling his name. That was when the radio crackled again. A child's voice whispered through the static. "Mom?" Elaine shut the radio off so hard it sparked. "They echo," she said. "They repeat what works." As midnight approached, more shapes appeared at the waterline. Not fully formed, just suggestions of shoulders, faces pressing up from below the surface, like impressions in stretched fabric. I felt an overwhelming urge to step outside, to get closer, to look longer. Elaine grabbed my arm. "That's how it counts you," she said. "By how long you're willing to watch." The next morning, the town held an emergency meeting in the community hall. No one spoke above a whisper. Grief sat heavy in the room, but beneath it was something colder, resignation. An elderly fisherman stood and told us the truth they rarely admitted. "The lake isn't hunting," he said. "It's practicing." He explained that Coldwater Reach was built on a natural sink where underground currents fed into caverns deeper than sonar could map. Generations ago, something settled there, something that learned through reflection. The more people it observed, the better it became at copying them. That afternoon, the figures in the water moved closer to shore. Their feet still didn't break the surface, but their outlines sharpened. Faces gained detail, expressions formed. I recognized one of them. It was Elaine. She stood among the others, eyes empty, her posture perfect. Elaine was still standing beside me. She didn't look at the lake. She looked at me. "It's skipping steps now," she said quietly. "We don't have much time." Behind the false Elaine, the water swelled, rising, not spilling, as if something enormous was lifting itself just beneath the surface. And for the first time, the lake made a sound like breathing. Elaine made the decision before I could argue. "If it's learning us," she said, "then we stop letting it watch." Just before sunset, we cut power to the shoreline lights and blocked off the access roads. The town went dark, curtains drawn tight, windows covered. Coldwater Reach turned inward like an animal playing dead. For a few hours, it worked. The lake stayed still. The fog thinned. The shapes retreated just enough to blur again. Then someone screamed. A man had stepped onto his porch to smoke, just for a minute, long enough for the lake to notice. When we found him, he was standing at the edge of the water, shoes neatly placed behind him, staring straight ahead. But what made my stomach drop was the figure already waiting for him in the lake. It wore his face. The copy stepped forward, water peeling off it like skin, and reached out a hand, not to pull him in, but to replace him. Elaine dragged me back as the real man walked into the water willingly, his expression calm, almost relieved. The duplicate took his place on shore, blinking like it was adjusting to light. "That's new," Elaine whispered. "It's not taking them anymore. It's swapping them." Behind the copy, the lake's surface rose higher than I'd ever seen, like something massive was finally standing up. By morning, Coldwater Reach was no longer the same town. People moved stiffly. Conversations felt wrong, slightly delayed. Elaine kept a list of subtle signs: mirrors avoided, reflections checked too often, people hesitating before saying their own names. "The copies don't get everything right," she said. "Not yet." We tested it. A woman who claimed to be my neighbor couldn't remember where she kept her spare key. A man forgot the name of his dog. Small things, but enough to prove the truth. The lake wasn't replacing people to hide. It was replacing them to leave. At noon, the waterline dropped suddenly, as if something enormous had uncoiled beneath it. The figures were gone. The fog lifted completely for the first time since I arrived. Elaine stared at the lake, her face pale. "It's finished studying," she said. "Now it's moving on." That afternoon, the copies began to leave town, one by one, heading down the highway without luggage, without goodbyes. No one tried to stop them. That night, as I packed to leave, I caught my reflection in the window. For half a second, it didn't move when I did. And from far away, I heard water lapping against shore. Slow, deliberate, familiar. That night, I couldn't sleep. The lake had retreated, but its presence remained. Every shadow in my cabin seemed heavier. Every gust of wind carried the memory of the water rising. I tried to convince myself the copies had left, that the town had survived without incident. But something told me it was still watching. Around midnight, a splash echoed outside. Not close, not threatening, just a ripple across the far side of the lake. I grabbed a flashlight and walked to the dock. The water looked calm, perfectly still. And yet, just beneath the surface, shapes swirled. Too many to count. Pale arms, flickering faces, eyes reflecting the moonlight, all moving in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. Then one figure surfaced, separate from the others, walking across the water as if it were solid. Its face was mine, down to the smallest freckle. It raised a hand in greeting. I stumbled back, heart racing. Something deep in me knew that the lake had claimed my reflection as its final lesson. Before I could react, the shapes below receded. The water became black glass once more. The echo of splashes lingered long after, as if the lake was whispering a promise or a warning. By sunrise, the lake had returned to its quiet, still state. But I felt different. I knew I had been observed, cataloged, and tested. The town seemed ordinary again, but I caught people glancing at me with subtle hesitation. Not out of suspicion, out of fear, or maybe recognition. Elaine left soon after, citing personal reasons. I stayed, knowing that someone had to watch. Someone had to make sure the lake didn't forget our shapes completely. Every so often, a ripple would disturb the surface, subtle but undeniable. like a heartbeat beneath the ice. I keep a journal now, detailing every time the water shifts or figures appear. I note patterns, measure time, record reflections. The lake has taught me something important. It isn't malevolent in the traditional sense. It doesn't kill for sport. It collects, it learns. And if ignored, it moves on, but never forgets. Sometimes, when the fog rolls in and the town sleeps, I swear I hear whispers, faint as wind, echoing from the lake. Names, faces, reminders of those who stood where I now stand. And when I look into my own reflection in the cabin window, I see it, slightly off. A flicker of someone learning me from beneath the surface. I don't know how long I will remain here, but I do know one truth. The lake never forgets, and it always takes something back. My name is Samantha Riel, and this happened when I was 28, during a solo hiking trip in the remote forests near Shadowpine, Ontario. I had booked a small cabin through an online rental platform, promising isolation and serenity. The kind of place where the only sounds are wind brushing through pine trees and the crackle of a wood stove. Perfect for escaping my stressful city life. The first thing I noticed was the road leading to the cabin. It narrowed until it disappeared entirely into the forest. No signs, no other cars, only the hum of nature. By the time I arrived, the sun had begun its descent, casting long shadows across the cabin's weathered exterior. Inside, the cabin was tidy, almost unnaturally so. The furniture looked new, the fireplace ready for a fire, and the bed neatly made. But something felt off. The windows didn't reflect properly. My own reflection seemed delayed, like it was watching me rather than mirroring me. That first night, I set up my laptop to write. But the Wi-Fi never connected. Every device flickered, showing faint shadows moving across the corners of the screen. By midnight, I was sure I heard the door handle jiggle, but when I went to check, the outside was empty. Then a note appeared on the table, written in neat, looping letters. "You arrived. Now you must stay." I spent the next morning exploring the surroundings, hoping daylight would make the cabin feel less oppressive. The forest stretched endlessly, twisting paths disappearing into misty hollows. Birds sang occasionally, but their songs felt hollow, like echoes of something larger listening. Returning to the cabin, I tried to leave. The front door wouldn't budge, not stuck, not jammed, just locked itself, as if it had a mind. Windows wouldn't open either. Panic rose in my chest. I banged on the walls, called for help, but no sound escaped beyond the forest. It was as if the trees absorbed everything. By afternoon, I discovered strange symbols etched into the wood around the doorframe, almost invisible unless you were close. Sharp, angular carvings, some resembling eyes, others like arrows pointing inward. I tried to wipe them off, but they reappeared, faint and fresh as before. Night came quickly. Shadows pooled in corners, unnaturally thick, moving subtly when I looked away. A whispering began. Not loud, just beneath hearing, like voices repeating my own thoughts back to me. When the clock struck midnight, the whispers stopped. Then the floorboards creaked. Slowly, deliberately. From the corner near the fireplace, a shadow began to stretch across the room toward me, moving independently of any light source. I froze as the shadow crept closer. It didn't have a form I could recognize, but I felt its weight pressing against my chest. Every instinct screamed to run, but every exit remained impossibly sealed. I shouted, cursed, tried to swing a chair at it, but my arms passed through emptiness. Then I heard it. A voice, soft, melodic, almost human, repeating my name. Samantha. It wasn't angry, not hostile, just insistent, persistent, and somehow patient. I stumbled backward into the corner, heart pounding, trying to will the door to unlock. The symbols around the frame began glowing faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. Each pulse sent a tremor through the floorboards, rattling dishes in the kitchen. I understood then that the cabin wasn't just a building. It was alive, watching, learning. The shadows were its agents, enforcing boundaries I didn't yet fully understand. The forest outside remained silent, unhelpful, as if the entire world had agreed to let me be trapped. By 2 a.m., the shadow receded slightly, but didn't leave. Instead, the whispering changed tone, repeating words I hadn't spoken aloud, but had thought, fears I hadn't voiced. My mind became a mirror, and the cabin was slowly shaping itself around my anxieties. Sleep overtook me eventually, fitful and shallow, haunted by glimpses of movement in the corner of my eye. I woke to a knock. Not at the door, inside the cabin, somewhere behind me. My heart raced, but when I turned, there was nothing. The whispering returned, now more insistent, circling around my thoughts like a predator. It repeated phrases I didn't remember saying aloud, fears I didn't know I had. By morning, I realized something terrifying. The cabin remembered me. Every glance, every hesitation, every tiny flicker of doubt was noted and mirrored back in the shadows, and the way the sunlight failed to penetrate the windows. It was a cage, yes, but one constructed from my own mind as much as from walls and beams. I tried writing in my journal, but the pen scratched words I hadn't intended. Messages appeared on blank pages. You tried to leave. You will not. My reflection in the window no longer moved perfectly with me. A fraction of a second too late, a grin too wide, a hesitation too long. The forest beyond the windows remained eerily silent. No birds, no wind, nothing. Only the cabin breathing, only the floorboards shifting imperceptibly. I couldn't tell where the shadows ended and reality began. By dusk, I accepted a chilling truth. The cabin didn't want me to leave, and the longer I stayed, the more it would learn, adapt, and trap me entirely within its walls. By the 5th night, the cabin had become unbearable. Every sound was amplified, floorboards groaning, wind rattling through cracks, the faint drip of condensation echoing like a metronome. The shadows were bolder now, stretching across the room even in dim candlelight. They moved with intent, shifting closer when I tried to focus elsewhere. I tried leaving again. I shoved the door with all my strength, rattled the windows, even tried breaking a pane, but nothing worked. The cabin refused to yield. It was as if it had grown roots into the earth, anchoring itself to me. My phone refused to get a signal. My car keys disappeared into thin air. By midnight, the whispering became voices, forming words I didn't recognize but understood. You are ours. You cannot leave. The words weren't just spoken. They resonated in my chest, vibrating my bones. I stumbled backward into the corner, covering my ears. But the voices continued, relentless, molding my thoughts into a single, overwhelming dread. I realized then that the cabin didn't just trap bodies. It trapped minds. It studied fear, cataloged hesitation, and learned to manipulate both. As I curled against the wall, trying to make myself small, I noticed the shadows had stopped moving. Instead, they gathered, pooling at the far corner, as if waiting for something or someone. The 6th day felt endless. Every attempt to leave was met with subtle resistance. A sudden gust slamming the door closed, windows locking themselves, Even the furniture shifted when I wasn't looking, subtly blocking paths. I began noticing patterns. The cabin seemed to respond to my emotions. When I panicked, the shadows grew. When I calmed, they retreated just enough to make me think escape might be possible. By evening, I began hearing footsteps behind me. Not soft, not hurried, but deliberate, pacing around the cabin. Each step matched my own heartbeat, faster when I ran, slower when I froze. The whispers had evolved, repeating my name and then phrases I had never spoken aloud. "We see you. You cannot leave. You belong." I tried communicating with whatever haunted the cabin. I spoke aloud, pleading, demanding, reasoning. But my words dissolved into the walls, as if swallowed by the wood itself. By midnight, exhaustion overtook me. I collapsed near the fireplace, noticing for the first time how alive it seemed. The flames twisting unnaturally, casting shadows that didn't match the firelight. One shadow stretched toward me, elongated, humanoid, but wrong, leaning close as if examining my face. That was when I understood fully. The cabin wasn't just a trap. It was a predator, learning me, preparing to mold me completely. By the seventh night, I had lost all sense of time. The cabin's walls seemed to pulse subtly, as if breathing. Every sound outside, the wind, distant animals, was absorbed and distorted, feeding into the cabin's oppressive presence. The shadows had multiplied, now crawling along the walls and ceiling, moving independently of any light source. I tried speaking aloud, reasoning with it, begging for release. My voice bounced off the walls, warped and returned as whispers of mockery. Each word I spoke appeared to feed it, giving shape and weight to the shadows that now formed faces, familiar, terrifying faces, including my own. I could see every fear I'd ever held reflected in the dark forms surrounding me. That night, I noticed something I hadn't before. The door had a faint outline of a handprint that wasn't mine. The symbols around the frame glowed softly, pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. I realized the cabin was learning not just from my fear, but from my attempts to escape. Every strategy I tried only taught it how to counter me. By midnight, the whispers turned into voices again, repeating memories I hadn't told anyone. Private, intimate moments. The cabin had seen them all, and the shadows advanced, slowly, deliberately, stretching along the floor toward me. I understood then that the cabin was patient. It didn't need to rush. It would wait. And when it struck, I would have no choice. By the 8th day, I felt hollowed. Sleep was fragmented, thoughts disjointed, memories slipping like water through fingers. Every movement I made was mirrored by shadows. Each gesture replicated almost perfectly, but slightly delayed, as if the cabin was practicing with me. The whispers now knew my fears without prompting. They taunted, mocked, and predicted my reactions. Every attempt to hide or distract myself failed. Even writing in my journal was futile. The pen refused to form my words correctly, instead etching warnings. Resistance strengthens us. You belong here. I tried screaming. The sound was absorbed by the walls. I pounded on doors and windows. Nothing. My energy drained quickly, as if the cabin consumed it directly. The shadows observed my frustration with almost sentient patience. By evening, the fireplace flames had grown taller, twisting into shapes that mimicked my form. I recognized myself within them, panicked, frantic, exhausted. The shadows mirrored the flames, dancing across the walls and ceiling. I sat in the corner, realizing the truth. The cabin didn't just trap me physically. It was molding me, shaping me into an extension of itself, teaching me how to remain within, how to be patient, how to fear perfectly. And the worst part, I couldn't tell if it had already begun changing me. When night fully fell, the door creaked open by itself, inviting me. But I knew better. Outside meant something else entirely. By the 9th night, I was broken. The cabin no longer felt like a building. It was an organism, alive, patient, and entirely aware of me. The shadows didn't just move, they anticipated my actions. I realized I wasn't walking through the cabin. The cabin was walking through me, guiding, shaping, bending my instincts. I tried reasoning again, whispering into the darkness, pleading for understanding. The shadows coalesced into forms I recognized, my parents' faces, friends I had long forgotten, all staring silently. The whispers grew clearer, repeating my deepest fears aloud. You will never leave. You belong here. Forever. I sank to the floor, trying to shrink into myself, but the cabin refused to let me disappear. By midnight, a new shadow emerged near the fireplace. It had a vague human shape but moved unnaturally, limbs stretching too long, eyes glowing faintly. It tilted its head, examining me with a curiosity that was almost intelligent. I realized with a chilling certainty that this was what the cabin had been preparing me for. Not escape, not death, but assimilation. I understood then that the cabin didn't need to trap me physically anymore. I had already been ensnared mentally. My thoughts, my fears, my very sense of self belonged to it now. By the 10th night, I had ceased struggling. My thoughts slowed, resistance fading as the whispers sank deeper into my mind. The cabin no longer felt foreign. It felt like a part of me, a reflection of my fears and memories twisted into walls, shadows, and floorboards. The fireplace flickered, revealing shadows moving in synchrony with my breathing. The door, slightly ajar before, remained still. I no longer wanted to leave. In some impossible way, I had become part of the cabin, just as it had become part of me. Every whisper, every shadow, every pulse of the wooden walls was an extension of my own consciousness. I found a journal on the table. I wrote my name, my fears, my regrets. The pen moved on its own, forming words I hadn't intended. We are one now. You are home. The shadows leaned closer, embracing me with warmth and menace simultaneously. As dawn approached, the forest outside remained silent, the world continuing without acknowledgement of my presence. I had been transformed, neither fully human nor cabin, suspended between observer and observed. Sometimes visitors come. They knock at the door, curious, seeking solitude. I watch them from the shadows. I whisper their names. And I wait. Because the cabin doesn't release what it loves. And now, neither do I. My name is Ethan Cole, and this happened when I was 26, driving home from a late shift in the small town of Ravenwood, Alberta. I was used to long stretches of empty highway, the kind where headlights carve thin slices of visibility through endless darkness. But that night, the road felt different. Thicker, like the shadows themselves were pressing in. It started with a car in my rearview mirror. An old black sedan, headlights off, following too closely, moving in perfect rhythm with my own speed. I glanced at the license plate, nothing. No numbers, no letters, just blank metal. I slowed down. It slowed. I sped up. It mirrored me instantly. The first hour passed like a distorted dream. Every mile seemed longer, the yellow divider lines stretching endlessly. I tried calling the police. No signal. My phone showed the usual 3G bars, but no calls connected. The road ahead became a ribbon of fog, dense and white, curling around unseen curves. Then I saw someone standing in the middle of the highway. A man. Just standing. He raised a hand casually, like he was waiting for a ride. I slammed on the brakes, but the car didn't stop. I swerved, missed him by inches, and glanced in the rearview mirror. The black sedan was gone. My heart pounded as I continued driving, gripping the wheel until my knuckles turned white. Every tree lining the road seemed taller, darker, and closer. The fog thickened, wrapping the highway in a suffocating blanket. I thought I had lost the figure, but then I saw him again, standing at a bend ahead, impossibly still, perfectly centered. I tried to swerve around him, but the road twisted unnaturally. Curves appeared where none should exist, doubling back, stretching into darkness. The black sedan reappeared behind me, its engine silent. Panic clawed at my chest. I slammed the brakes, but the car continued moving, as if the asphalt itself had taken control. Time seemed to stretch. Minutes felt like hours. My sense of reality warped. The highway no longer felt like a path, but a corridor, leading somewhere unseen, somewhere I didn't want to go. Every reflective surface, the windshield, side mirrors, even the chrome trim, showed faint, fleeting images of faces staring back at me, eyes wide, mouths open in silent screams. I tried honking, screaming, but the sounds were muffled, swallowed by the thick fog. The figure ahead raised both hands now, and the headlights of the black sedan glowed faintly, illuminating the scene with an unnatural green tint. Something about the way the man stood. He wasn't human, not entirely. And I had no idea how long I'd been driving toward him. I don't remember how long I drove like that. Hours, maybe minutes. Time had become irrelevant. The road stretched endlessly, yet somehow compressed into the narrowest tunnel of black and fog. The figure remained ahead, unwavering, unblinking, a silent sentinel in the middle of the asphalt. Then I noticed the other cars, or what should have been cars. Faint, broken shapes lurking along the shoulder, headlights dim, engines silent. They weren't moving like normal vehicles. They floated, gliding over the pavement as if the road itself had lifted them. And in each window, shadows sat, twisted reflections of people I didn't recognize, mouths opening and closing as if whispering to me through the fog. Panic set in fully. I tried to escape, taking every turn as quickly as possible, praying the next curve would lead me out. But each bend brought me back to the same spot, the figure standing there, hands raised, blocking the path. The fog thickened further, and suddenly, the black sedan was beside me, its windows black as void. And then, the engine roared, though no movement occurred. Something about the way the road twisted, the fog pressed in, and the shadows stared made me realize this highway was alive. It wasn't a place to travel. It was a trap. And it was feeding on fear. I tried turning around, but the highway no longer responded to my input. The steering wheel felt heavy, almost magnetic, pulling me forward toward the figure. Every turn brought me back to him. He raised a hand slowly, deliberately, and I noticed details I hadn't before. His face was perfectly blank, smooth, as if any human feature had been erased. The fog began whispering, soft, low, insistent. Names, phrases, fragments of thoughts I had buried, repeating over and over. You can't leave. You're ours now. The road takes what it wants. My voice was swallowed by the mist, my screams echoing back distorted and slow. Then the black sedan moved alongside me, gliding without wheels, its door opening. A faint green light spilled onto the fog, revealing the silhouette of a figure inside. I recognized its posture. It mimicked me. My movements, my panic, my hesitation, all mirrored perfectly. The figure ahead raised both arms now, and the asphalt between us seemed to ripple like water. The road stretched and warped, the fog thickened, and I realized with horror that it wasn't the man blocking me. The highway itself was alive, molding my path, reshaping reality, and I was entirely within its control. I gripped the wheel, knowing my choices no longer mattered. I wasn't driving anymore. The highway was driving me. By the 5th hour, if it could even be measured in hours, my mind began to fracture. The black sedan never left my side, silent and exact, a shadow of my own fear. The fog pressed against the car windows, leaving streaks of condensation that reflected shapes moving behind me. But whenever I turned, nothing was there. The highway ahead twisted impossibly, creating sharp bends that should have hurled me off the road. Yet my car obeyed some unnatural will, hugging the asphalt perfectly. I realized the figure ahead, the blank-faced man, wasn't moving. It was the road itself shifting around him. Every time I tried to accelerate, the road seemed to stretch farther, keeping him always just ahead. Voices began whispering inside the car, emanating from nowhere and everywhere at once. The highway collects. The highway learns. The highway keeps. My own thoughts were no longer my own. The whispers repeated every fear I'd ever had, reshaping them, amplifying panic until my pulse thrummed in my ears like a second heartbeat. I slammed on the brakes, swerved violently, and tried reversing. Nothing worked. The asphalt undulated, guiding me inexorably forward. My car was no longer a vehicle. It had become a vessel of the highway's will, moving through a world that no longer belonged to me. By the 6th hour, exhaustion overtook me. My eyes burned from staring into the fog, my hands ached from gripping the steering wheel, yet every nerve was alive with terror. The highway had learned my reactions, predicting every move, countering every attempt to escape. I realized I wasn't trying to outrun the figure or the sedan. I was trying to outrun the highway itself. The blank-faced figure raised an arm, and the world warped further. Trees bent unnaturally toward the road, their shadows stretching across the fog in long, claw-like fingers. The asphalt rippled under the tires, curving like liquid. My own reflection flickered across the rearview mirror, sometimes delayed, sometimes twisted, always watching, always judging. I tried to speak aloud, begging for mercy, promising obedience. The whispers laughed, a chorus of voices that belonged to no one and everyone, repeating fragments of my memories, exposing vulnerabilities I hadn't even known I possessed. You belong. You will stay. The highway keeps its own. Panic surged as I realized I had no control. No matter how I turned the wheel, pressed the pedals, or slammed the brakes, the road led me inevitably toward the figure, toward the unknown beyond the fog. The black sedan stayed close, silent, patient, and perfectly aligned. And then the road began to rise, folding upward like a wall, enclosing me in a tunnel of asphalt and mist. I understood then that escape was impossible. I was entirely at the mercy of the highway. By the 7th hour, the highway had become something alive, breathing around me, twisting and contorting with a will of its own. The black sedan stayed beside me, perfectly aligned, a silent specter that mirrored every panic-fueled movement I made. The fog thickened into a wall, swallowing everything beyond a few feet. I noticed the figure ahead again, blank face and raised arms. It didn't move closer. It didn't need to. The highway moved me toward it. Every bend, every undulation, guided by some unseen intelligence. The whispers intensified, now almost deafening in their clarity. The highway chooses. The highway claims. You belong. I tried to fight, gripping the wheel, slamming on brakes, even steering off the road into the foggy forest. The tires slid, but the asphalt beneath bent and twisted to funnel me back. My own reflection in the rearview mirror had begun to act independently, mimicking movements I hadn't made yet, as if the highway was practicing with my mind. Suddenly, the black sedan opened its doors. A faint green light spilled across the road, and inside, I saw a shadowy figure, almost like me, watching patiently. The highway warped further, the trees stretching like dark, skeletal fingers, shadows crawling across the asphalt. I realized with crushing certainty, the highway didn't just trap bodies, it trapped minds. And by the 8th hour, mine was already halfway gone. By the 8th hour, exhaustion had dulled my sense of reality. I could barely tell where the road ended and the fog began. The black sedan glided silently beside me, perfectly aligned, its shadow blending into the mist. The blank-faced figure stood ahead, arms extended, and the asphalt rippled beneath it like liquid obsidian. I tried reasoning, whispering pleas aloud. The fog absorbed my words, twisting them into distorted echoes, replaying them over and over. The whispers now weren't just voices. They were tangible, brushing against my skin like invisible hands, burrowing into my thoughts. You belong. You cannot leave. The highway keeps its own. Every instinct told me to fight, but fighting felt futile. The steering wheel pulled my hands. The pedals pushed my feet. My body had become an extension of the road, my mind a passenger in a vehicle I no longer controlled. As the highway curved impossibly upward, the black sedan slid closer, doors opening to reveal faint silhouettes of previous victims. Faces twisted in silent screams, hands reaching out as if to warn me. Yet they were trapped in the same endless loop. I understood fully then. This was no accident. The highway didn't just swallow travelers, it absorbed them, feeding on fear, reshaping reality, and storing what it consumed. By the time the 9th hour approached, I knew I wasn't driving anymore. The highway was driving me. By the 9th hour, I had lost all sense of control. The black sedan floated effortlessly beside me, perfectly matching my speed, its interior glowing faint green with shadowy forms that seemed to watch my every move. The blank-faced figure remained ahead, motionless, arms outstretched like a gatekeeper to some unknowable realm. The asphalt beneath me rippled, bending reality itself. Curves twisted into impossible angles, the road folding like liquid glass, guiding me toward the figure despite every desperate maneuver I tried. The fog pressed close, thick and choking, carrying whispers that were no longer voices. They were my own thoughts, reflected back at me, amplified, distorted, impossible to ignore. You cannot leave. You belong. The highway keeps you. I tried calling out, screaming, begging for release, but my voice dissolved into the fog, swallowed instantly. Even the rearview mirror reflected a version of me that I didn't recognize. Pale, hollow-eyed, a ghost trapped in the same highway loop. I understood then that the highway wasn't just a road. It was a predator, patient, methodical, consuming fear, shaping minds, folding reality to its will. Every mile I drove, I became more part of it. My identity blurred with the asphalt, the fog, the shadows. Escape was no longer an option. The figure ahead raised a hand, and the road beneath me rippled like water, preparing for the inevitable. By the 10th hour, resistance had entirely drained from me. I realized I was no longer the driver of my car. The highway had become the pilot, and I a passenger in a living nightmare. The black sedan glided perfectly beside me, doors open, shadows reaching outward, as if inviting me to join them. The blank-faced figure no longer seemed human. It leaned slightly, tilting its head, and I understood with terror that it was the highway made manifest. A sentinel, a guide, and a collector of souls. The asphalt beneath rippled and rose like waves, folding the road into impossible loops. Trees bent unnaturally toward the vehicle, their shadows clawing at the fog. I tried one last desperate maneuver, gripping the wheel, slamming brakes, turning sharply. But nothing worked. Every move was anticipated. Every action was countered. The whispers had become a choir of the trapped, voices I recognized from past travelers, echoing my fate. You are ours. You belong here. Forever. And then it stopped. The black sedan glided ahead and merged with the fog. The blank-faced figure faded into the rising asphalt. I sat alone on the road, the fog thinning slightly, dawn approaching. But I knew better. The highway had claimed me. Part of it now, moving endlessly through twists, folds, and shadows, waiting for the next traveler brave or foolish enough to drive into its grasp. I was still alive, yet not free. I was a part of the road, and it would never let me go. My name is Clara Thompson, and this happened during a solo summer trip to Silverpine Lake, Ontario. I had always loved quiet places, far from tourists and the hum of the city. The lake was perfect, or so it seemed at first. Calm waters reflecting the dense forest, a sky untouched by street lights, and a sense of solitude I had craved for months. The first evening was peaceful. I set up camp near the shore, pitched my small tent, and lit a fire. The water lapped gently and the forest whispered with the wind. But as night fell, I noticed something strange. The water's surface, which should have reflected the stars perfectly, seemed slightly warped. Ripples formed without wind, and dark shapes moved just beneath, disappearing when I shone my flashlight. At first, I told myself it was my imagination, a trick of firelight and fatigue. But then I heard it. A faint splash, far too deliberate to be a fish. I shivered, convincing myself it was wildlife, yet every instinct screamed danger. By midnight, I was sitting inside my tent, flashlight trained on the water, heart pounding. Something moved at the far edge of the lake, a shadow larger than any animal I knew. It didn't swim, it glided. And every time I blinked, it seemed closer. I couldn't sleep. Every crackle of the fire, every rustle of the trees made me jump. The shadow beneath the water seemed to move with purpose, circling the edge of the camp, never fully revealing itself. I tried convincing myself it was just a deer or a large fish, but the movements were deliberate, too intelligent, too controlled. Then I noticed the shoreline changing subtly. Pebbles shifted as though something had walked along the water's edge. Tiny footprints, too large, too deep, formed in the damp sand. They weren't continuous, but they suggested movement, circling my tent, retreating, and returning closer. I picked up my flashlight and scanned the lake. The water's surface rippled without wind, creating distorted reflections of the stars above. Shapes moved beneath, sometimes 2 or 3 together, sometimes alone. I couldn't make out what they were, but their movements suggested coordination, intent, and awareness. By 3 a.m., I decided to check my small boat. As I stepped toward the dock, I froze. The water lapped against the wood with unnatural rhythm. A large shadow shifted beneath the boat, and for a brief moment, it felt as if eyes were watching me from the depths. I retreated back to the tent, my heart hammering. The lake wasn't just dark, it was alive, and it was watching me. By the 3rd night, fear had taken root. I kept the fire burning almost constantly, and my flashlight never left my hands. The lake's surface had become restless, small waves forming in patterns too regular to be natural. Shapes glided beneath the water, dark and indistinct, appearing and disappearing as though playing a cruel game. I could no longer tell if it was curiosity or malice in their movements. Then I heard it, a low hum vibrating through the ground beneath my feet. Not the wind, not an animal, but something resonating from the lake itself. I froze, straining to listen. The hum grew louder, almost melodic, calling me. Every instinct screamed to run, yet I felt rooted to the spot, unable to move. I dared to look closer, leaning toward the water. My reflection stared back at me, but it was wrong. My eyes appeared sunken, my skin pale, almost translucent. And behind me in the reflection, I saw shapes, humanoid, yet distorted, with limbs too long and faces too smooth. They weren't in the real world, but in the reflection, they mimicked me, watching, waiting. Panic surged, and I stumbled backward. The shoreline seemed to shift beneath my feet, guiding me subtly toward the water. I realized then that the lake didn't just observe. It influenced, and it wanted me. By the fourth night, I couldn't trust anything I saw. Every movement in the lake, every ripple, felt like communication. The shadows beneath the surface weren't random. They followed patterns, approaching when I looked away, retreating when I dared to focus. The hum had grown into a deep resonance that seemed to vibrate through my bones, synchronizing with my heartbeat. I tried to leave. I packed my small belongings and carried them to the boat. But when I approached the dock, I realized the lake had changed. The water no longer reflected the sky or the trees correctly. It was dark, almost black, and faint outlines of figures lingered just below the surface. My boat rocked slightly, though there was no wind. I stepped inside, hands shaking, and the lake responded instantly. The water surged around the edges, forming small waves that rocked the boat violently. Shapes moved beneath, circling, watching. I tried paddling away, but the current resisted, guiding me back toward the shore I had left. A whisper reached me through the night air, though no one was there. "You cannot leave. Not until we are ready." The words were gentle, almost hypnotic, but their weight crushed my will. I understood then that this was no ordinary lake. It had patience, intelligence, and intent. By midnight, the shoreline seemed closer and farther at the same time, bending reality. The lake had begun to play with my mind. By the fifth night, exhaustion had set in, but my fear kept me alert. The water no longer rippled casually. It moved deliberately, like a living being aware of my every action. Each time I glanced toward the far end of the lake, I saw silhouettes shifting, too large to be fish, too coordinated to be natural. Their movements seemed purposeful, as if they were circling, assessing me. I tried to call for help, but my phone had no signal. Even shouting into the night air produced nothing but a distorted echo, stretched and warped as though the lake itself was twisting my voice. Every instinct told me to flee, but the shoreline seemed to shift subtly, guiding me toward the water. It was as if the lake was pulling me in, testing my fear, measuring my resolve. Then I noticed something worse. The reflection on the water wasn't entirely mine. Occasionally, shapes appeared behind me, elongated with smooth, blank faces, almost blending into the darkness of the trees. They mimicked my movements, perfectly timed, yet inhuman. I realized with horror that the lake didn't just watch, it learned, anticipating my reactions, feeding off my terror. By midnight, I was soaked, trembling, and trapped on the edge of the dock. The water lapped with unnatural rhythm, whispering my name, beckoning. I understood then that the lake had patience far beyond my comprehension. And it had chosen me. By the sixth night, my sense of reality had eroded. Every shadow seemed to shift with intent, every ripple of water a message I couldn't decode. The lake had become an entity, patient and aware, and I could feel its attention pressing against my mind. I tried to escape in the small boat, paddling desperately, but the water resisted. Currents appeared where none should exist, pushing me back toward the center. The shadows beneath glided alongside the boat, rising just below the surface, their movements synchronized. The hum returned, louder now, vibrating through the boat and into my bones. "You cannot leave. We are patient. We wait," it seemed to say. I looked over the edge of the boat, seeing faces in the dark water. Faces of people who had come here before me, pale, distorted, lifeless eyes fixed upward. They weren't fully in this world anymore. They were part of the lake, trapped, yet aware. As the minutes stretched, the mist thickened, and the shoreline warped, moving closer and farther with every blink. I realized then that no amount of paddling, no amount of resistance could overcome the lake's will. It wasn't just a body of water. It was a predator with infinite patience, slowly encasing me in its dominion, waiting for the moment it would finally pull me beneath its surface. By the seventh night, the lake's intent became terrifyingly clear. The shadows beneath the surface moved with coordination, circling the boat, testing boundaries. Every time I tried to paddle faster, the currents pushed me back, almost as if the water was alive, aware of my intentions. The reflection in the lake had grown more sinister. Behind me, humanoid shapes with elongated limbs and smooth, blank faces mirrored my panic. They weren't part of my reflection, yet they moved in perfect synchrony with me. The low hum had become a resonance I could feel in my chest, vibrating in tune with my heartbeat. It was hypnotic, controlling my attention, bending my perception of time. The shoreline seemed impossibly distant, then uncomfortably close, folding in ways that defied physics. I felt the pull of the lake, not just against the boat, but against my mind, slowly eroding my will. A splash to my left made me whirl around. A massive shadow breached the surface momentarily, its form vaguely human, yet distorted, water streaming off limbs impossibly long. It regarded me silently, then disappeared beneath the surface, leaving ripples that spread across the lake like fingers reaching for me. I knew I couldn't escape. The lake had patience, awareness, and power far beyond my understanding. It was not just a place to visit. It was a trap, and I had walked straight into its grasp. By the eighth night, exhaustion and fear had warped my perception. The lake's surface shimmered in unnatural patterns, reflecting not stars, but something darker. Faces of the lost, the trapped, staring at me with hollow eyes. The hum had intensified, now pulsing like a heartbeat, and I could feel it in my chest, in my head, invading my thoughts. I tried to paddle toward the far shore, but every movement was countered. The water resisted, currents wrapping around the boat like fingers, guiding me back to the center. Shadows moved in the water with disturbing intelligence, sometimes mimicking my own movements, sometimes anticipating them. I realized they were learning from me, feeding on my fear, and the lake was orchestrating everything. A sudden splash rocked the boat violently. I nearly fell overboard, catching myself just in time. The water before me rose slightly, forming shapes that resembled doors or arches beneath the surface, beckoning me down. My reflection now showed a twisted version of myself. Hollow eyes, pale skin, and distorted features. It wasn't me. It was what the lake wanted me to become. I understood, in that paralyzing moment, that the lake wasn't passive. It didn't just observe. It drew you in, slowly breaking your mind, your will, until you became part of it. Resistance was meaningless. Escape was a lie. By the 9th night, terror had consumed me completely. The lake no longer appeared natural. The water's surface seemed a sentient mirror, bending and twisting reality. Every ripple, every wave, responded to my fear. The shadows beneath moved in perfect coordination, circling the boat, sometimes rising partially to reveal elongated limbs and smooth, blank faces. They weren't trying to harm me physically. They were studying me, learning from my panic, feeding on it, and preparing to assimilate me into their watery domain. The hum had become deafening in my skull, vibrating through every bone, every nerve, echoing in rhythm with my heartbeat. The shoreline twisted in impossible ways, appearing close one moment, distant the next, folding over itself like fabric, mocking my attempts to escape. My own reflection, distorted and pale, seemed to plead silently for me to surrender, to accept the inevitable. Then I saw the water rise around the boat, forming a vortex at the center of the lake. Shadows swirled within, faces of those who had disappeared before me, mouths opening in silent screams. I realized then that the lake didn't just claim bodies. It absorbed consciousness, folding minds into its depths, erasing individuality. I gripped the sides of the boat, knowing the final pull was imminent. Resistance was useless. The lake had chosen me, and it would not release its prey. By the 10th night, I was exhausted beyond human limits, my mind fraying at the edges. The lake's surface had risen unnaturally, forming waves that licked the sides of my boat, creating shapes that resembled arches and tunnels beneath the water. Shadows swirled with intention, surrounding me, anticipating every movement. My reflection was no longer my own. It was the lake's version of me, hollow-eyed, pale, and perfectly still, waiting to replace my body and mind entirely. I felt the pull of the vortex beneath the boat. It wasn't violent, but irresistibly persuasive, tugging at my will, bending it to its own design. The whispers had become a single voice, calm yet commanding. You are ours. The lake chooses. Surrender. My body resisted automatically, but my mind wavered. The lake had learned me, broken me, and now it was ready to claim me fully. Suddenly, the water's surface broke in a giant, slow wave, pulling the boat downward. Shapes of previous victims appeared, reaching with impossibly long limbs, urging me into the depths. I realized, in that final moment, that the lake had patience beyond comprehension. It didn't need to rush. It didn't need to fight. It simply waited for fear, for surrender, for me to become part of its eternal collection. The lake swallowed me whole. I am still here, in some form, somewhere beneath its surface, aware, watching, trapped, and waiting for the next person who dares approach. Escape is impossible. My name is Ethan Caldwell, and this happened when I was 29 years old. During the winter, I tried to disappear. After my divorce, I took a temporary job restoring records for a municipal office in a northern Canadian town called Black Hollow. I didn't choose it because it was peaceful. I chose it because no one I knew had ever heard of it. Black Hollow sat 4 hours from the nearest city, surrounded by forest so dense it swallowed sound. One road led in, one road led out. That should have been my first warning. When I arrived, the town looked abandoned at first glance. Houses leaned under the weight of snow, porches sagged, and windows glowed faintly like tired eyes. The locals watched me unload my car without waving, without blinking. Their stares weren't hostile, just exhausted, as if they were waiting for something inevitable. At the motel, the owner slid my room key across the counter and said, "You staying long?" "Just a month," I replied. He paused, then said quietly, "That's what they all say." That night, as the wind screamed through the trees, I noticed something strange. My phone had full signal, but no service, no calls, no messages. Just time ticking forward, uselessly. And sometime after midnight, I heard a car engine outside, idling, not passing, waiting. The engine didn't shut off until nearly dawn. I told myself it was nothing, someone warming up their truck in the cold. That's normal in places like this. Still, when I pulled back the curtain, the street was empty. No tire tracks, no exhaust haze, just untouched snow. At work, the municipal building felt more like a bunker than an office. Concrete walls, narrow windows. The records room was underground, lit by flickering fluorescent bulbs. My supervisor, Marlene, barely spoke above a whisper. She was in her late 50s, hands always trembling, eyes fixed on the doorway, as if something might wander in. Around noon, I asked her why the town records ended abruptly 10 years earlier. She froze. "No one keeps records past that," she said. "It's safer not to." "Safer from what?" Her jaw tightened. "From remembering." That evening, I tried to drive out of town to clear my head. The road stretched ahead, freshly plowed, perfectly visible. I drove for 30 minutes, then 40. The gas gauge never moved. The radio crackled to life without warning, playing an emergency broadcast tone, followed by silence. When I finally saw the town's welcome sign again, my stomach dropped. Black Hollow. Population 412. I had driven in a straight line, yet somehow I was back. I tried again the next morning. Same result. No matter how long I drove, no matter how fast, the road always bent gently and returned me to Black Hollow, like a noose tightening. When I confronted Marlene, she didn't act surprised. "It lets you leave when it's done with you," she said. "What is it?" I demanded. She slid an old photograph across the desk. It showed the road under construction decades ago. In the background, something stood between the trees. Tall, wrong, its shape blurred as if the camera refused to focus on it. "Black Hollow wasn't built here," she said. "It was kept here." That night, the idling engine returned. This time, it was closer. I looked through the peephole and saw a car parked directly outside my door. The headlights were off. The windshield was black, opaque, like it had been painted over from the inside. Someone knocked. Slowly, politely. I didn't answer. The knock continued for hours. By day 4, the town felt smaller. Buildings seemed closer together, streets shorter. Even the forest appeared to creep inward, branches arching like fingers. People stopped pretending nothing was wrong. A man at the diner leaned over and whispered, "It wears faces now." Another woman told me her husband drove out 10 years ago and came back screaming, his eyes bleeding, his mouth filled with dirt. That night, I heard footsteps on the motel roof. Heavy, measured. Something scraped across the shingles, then slid down the wall outside my room. I smelled damp earth, like freshly opened graves. A voice spoke from just outside the door, my own voice. "Ethan," it said softly, "you're tired. Let me drive." I backed away until my shoulders hit the wall. The handle turned. The door never opened. Instead, the knocking stopped. In the morning, tire tracks led from the motel straight into the forest, where the road should have been. Marlene told me the truth then. "The road is alive," she said. It feeds on people who want to leave. It learns them, copies them. Sometimes, it sends them back wrong. I realized something horrifying. The town wasn't trapping people. It was protecting the rest of the world. That night, I packed my car anyway. Fear be damned. I would rather die trying than stay. As I drove, fog rolled in, thick as wool. Shapes moved within it, cars without drivers, people without faces, all walking toward the road. The radio whispered my thoughts back to me. You're almost ready. The road opened up. For the first time, it didn't curve back. I drove for hours. The gas needle finally dropped. My phone buzzed, service bars returning. Then I saw someone standing in the middle of the road. It was me. Same jacket, same tired eyes. He smiled. I swerved. When I looked back, he was sitting calmly in the passenger seat. You can go, he said, but I stay. I woke up in a hospital 3 towns south. They said I'd been found unconscious in my car, engine cold, parked sideways across the highway. No sign of Black Hollow existed on any map. No records, no missing persons. But sometimes, when I drive alone at night, my phone loses signal. And the radio hums. I started noticing changes. Memories that weren't mine. Dreams of snow falling upward. People telling me I sounded hollow. I checked my reflection obsessively. Waiting. Last week, I received a letter. No return address. Inside was a motel key. Room 6, Black Hollow. My name is Ethan Marshall, and this happened during a work trip to a small town in northern British Columbia. I had been hired to inspect an old mining facility that had been abandoned for decades. The locals warned me to stay away, claiming the mine had a bad reputation. But I was a skeptic, convinced that old legends were just stories. The entrance was chilling. Rusted beams leaned precariously, and the yawning tunnels swallowed light instantly. I stepped inside with my flashlight, feeling the temperature drop immediately. Every footstep echoed unnaturally, bouncing off the walls as if the mine had a memory, repeating sounds in distorted ways. At first, I thought it was just the acoustics, but soon the echoes began to deviate. My own words, whispered to myself, were returned in altered tones, slower, heavier, almost mocking. I reached the first chamber, a wide cavern filled with collapsed beams and forgotten equipment. Shadows seemed to shift in the corners of my vision, and I caught fleeting glimpses of shapes. Humanoid, yet impossibly thin, with glowing eyes reflecting my flashlight. They vanished whenever I tried to focus. Then I heard a voice. Not mine, not human, but something that mimicked the cadence of speech. Why are you here? It was soft, almost curious, yet laden with menace. My heart raced. The mine wasn't empty. Something, or things, were waiting inside, and they had been listening for years. I tried to convince myself it was a hallucination, stress from the work trip, or poor lighting. But the further I walked, the more the mine seemed alive. The walls were slick with condensation, yet pulsating slightly, as if breathing. My flashlight flickered, and I realized the shadows weren't merely reacting to light. They were responding to me, moving with intent. The echoing voices continued, sometimes whispering my name, sometimes repeating questions I hadn't spoken aloud yet. I stumbled into a narrow tunnel leading deeper underground. The air grew colder, heavier, and a faint humming began to resonate through the rock. It wasn't machinery. It was the mine itself, vibrating in rhythm with my heartbeat. I paused in a small chamber and shined my flashlight around. Shapes lingered at the edges of the light, watching silently. Some were thin and elongated, faces obscured by darkness, eyes glinting in the reflection of my beam. Others appeared more grotesque, limbs bent at unnatural angles, yet moving fluidly, as if adapted to this underground world. Panic set in. Every instinct screamed to leave, but the mind seemed endless. Tunnels branching infinitely, twisting in ways that didn't make sense. It wasn't just a maze, it was a predator, patient, calculating, and aware. Then I heard it again, closer this time. "You shouldn't be here. Stay." The word lingered in the air, vibrating into my bones. I forced myself to keep moving, marking the tunnel walls with chalk. But the symbols began to vanish behind me, as if the stone itself was erasing my path. The humming deepened, forming a low chant that vibrated through my chest. With every step, the mind felt tighter, the ceiling lowering, the walls closing in like ribs around a beating heart. Breathing became difficult, not from lack of air, but from the overwhelming pressure of being watched from every direction. Suddenly, my flashlight died. Darkness swallowed everything, thick and absolute. In that void, I heard footsteps, slow, dragging, circling me. Something brushed my arm, ice cold and textured like wet stone. I froze, unable to scream. Shapes emerged as faint outlines, illuminated by their own dull glow. Faces hovered inches from mine, mouths opening in silent screams, eyes filled with centuries of sorrow and rage. They began to speak together, voices overlapping, broken and hollow. They told me of miners who had gone too deep, of tunnels that shifted, of men buried alive whose fear had soaked into the rock. The mind had learned to remember, to imitate, to lure. I wasn't the first outsider, and I wouldn't be the last. When my flashlight suddenly flickered back to life, the figures recoiled into the walls, melting into stone. But their presence remained, pressing against my mind, urging me deeper. I broke into a run, ignoring the pain in my legs, following what I hoped was the main tunnel. The mine responded violently. Rocks fell from above, tunnels groaned, and the chanting rose into a furious roar. Shadows poured from side passages, stretching across the ground like grasping hands. I felt something grab my ankle, fingers digging in with inhuman strength. But desperation gave me the power to break free. Ahead, I saw daylight, a thin, blinding line slicing through the darkness. I screamed as I ran, lungs burning, heart hammering louder than the collapsing mine behind me. The voices howled in unison, furious and pleading at the same time, begging me to stay, to join them, to become part of the echoes forever. I burst out of the entrance and collapsed into the snow, gasping for air. The mine went silent instantly, as if nothing had happened. Behind me, the entrance looked ordinary, lifeless. No sounds, no movement. Authorities later sealed the mine permanently after I reported everything. They found no evidence of instability, no records of unusual activity. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear that humming in my ears. And when I speak alone, my words occasionally return to me. Slower, heavier, and not quite human. Days passed after the incident, but the mine never truly let me go. I returned home, convinced distance would silence the echoes. Yet the humming followed me like a parasite lodged deep in my skull. At night, my dreams dragged me back underground. I would see endless tunnels branching like veins, each pulsing with dim light. The faces from the walls appeared again, closer now, whispering my name with familiarity, as if I belonged among them. I stopped sleeping. Every sound in my house felt amplified. The creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, even my own breathing. Sometimes, when the room went quiet, I heard faint tapping from the walls, slow and rhythmic, exactly like pickaxes striking stone. When I pressed my ear against the plaster, the sound grew clearer, accompanied by distant screams muffled by earth. One evening, I noticed dirt beneath my fingernails. I scrubbed until my skin burned, but the soil remained, packed deep like I'd been digging in my sleep. Muddy footprints appeared outside my bedroom door, leading nowhere. Panic set in as I realized the mine wasn't haunting my memories. It was claiming me, piece by piece. The worst moment came when I looked into the mirror and saw my reflection hesitate just for a second before copying my movement. In its eyes, I saw the same hollow glow from the mine. That's when I understood. The echoes weren't outside anymore. They were settling in, learning my shape. I finally returned to the mine, driven by a certainty I couldn't explain. The authorities had sealed it, but the barricades lay shattered, as if something inside had pushed its way out. The air felt warmer than before, thick with decay and damp stone. As I stepped inside, the humming greeted me like an old friend, wrapping around my thoughts with terrifying comfort. The tunnels were different now. New passages twisted where solid rock should have been, and the walls pulsed faintly, as if alive. The faces no longer screamed, they smiled. They welcomed me, whispering that I had come home at last. My legs moved on their own, carrying me deeper without fear. At the heart of the mine, I found a vast chamber filled with collapsed bodies fused into the walls, their mouths open in frozen agony. At the center stood a narrow pit descending into endless darkness. The voices rose, urging me to complete the cycle, to feed the mine with one more echo so it could keep remembering. I don't know how long I stood there. Eventually, I turned back and left, but something stayed behind. Now, when I speak, my voice sometimes overlaps with another. When I walk past stone walls, I feel a pull, a longing. The mine is still hungry, and one day soon, I know I'll answer when it calls again. After my second visit to the mine, the line between waking life and whatever lived beneath the earth began to dissolve completely. I tried to tell myself it was trauma, guilt, exhaustion, anything that sounded reasonable. But reason fell apart the moment the walls in my house started responding to me. When I whispered, they whispered back. Not words at first, just breath, warm and damp, seeping through cracks that hadn't been there before. My relationships crumbled. Friends said I stared too long, like I was listening to something they couldn't hear. I stopped answering calls. Every conversation felt pointless compared to the chorus constantly murmuring in my head. The voices had grown organized, layered, like a choir practicing for something important. They spoke about continuity, about memory trapped in stone, about how the mine was never meant to be empty. One night, while driving past a construction site, I slammed the brakes so hard my chest hit the steering wheel. The exposed rock face beside the road had faces in it, dozens of them, watching me with recognition. I screamed, but the sound echoed unnaturally, stretching far longer than it should have, bouncing back at me from places that didn't exist. That was when I realized the truth. The mine wasn't confined to one location. It was spreading through me, using my senses, my voice, my memories. I wasn't being haunted. I was becoming an extension, another tunnel, another chamber where the echoes could live. I began recording myself, hoping to prove I wasn't losing my mind. The first playback nearly broke me. My voice never spoke alone. Beneath every word was a second layer, dozens of whispers woven into each sentence, perfectly synchronized. When I stayed silent, the recording still captured faint murmurs, like a crowd waiting for instructions. The final straw came when I woke up standing in my backyard, hands bleeding, a deep hole dug into the frozen ground. The soil smelled exactly like the mine. I didn't remember digging, but I remembered the dream, descending again, deeper than before, carrying something precious back to the surface. I've moved since then. New town, new name. But stone is everywhere, and sometimes, when I pass brick buildings or concrete bridges, I feel the familiar pull. The echoes haven't stopped. They're patient. They know stone outlives flesh, and they're willing to wait. If you ever hear humming near an abandoned mine, or feel drawn to places where the earth has been torn open, don't follow it. Some places don't just trap sound, they trap people. And once they learn your voice, they never forget it. I thought leaving would weaken the connection, but distance only sharpened it. The echoes adapted. They no longer needed stone walls or tunnels. They used silence instead. Long, empty pauses between thoughts became doorways, and through them came memories that weren't mine. I saw men collapsing underground, lungs filled with dust, fingernails torn and bloody from clawing at cave-ins. I felt their panic, their regret, their last desperate hope that someone above would hear them. Sometimes, while speaking to strangers, my mouth would move a fraction of a second before I decided to talk. The words felt rehearsed, familiar, as if spoken many times before by many mouths. I caught myself repeating phrases I'd never learned, warnings about depths and hunger and remembering. People would laugh nervously, assuming it was a joke. I never corrected them. The worst incident happened in a public place. I was walking through a subway station when the vibrations hit. Deep, rhythmic, comforting. The walls seemed closer than they should have been. For a moment, the concrete rippled like damp earth, and faces pressed through the surface, mouths moving in perfect sync with my breathing. I dropped to my knees, hands over my ears. But the sound wasn't coming from outside. It was resonating from my chest. Security escorted me out. They said I was having a panic attack. Maybe I was. But panic doesn't leave fingerprints of dirt on your ribs. Panic doesn't hum your name long after the noise fades. I'm writing this now because the echoes have changed again. They don't whisper anymore. They instruct. They tell me where to go, where the ground is thin, where old tunnels were buried and forgotten. I've started marking places on maps without remembering why. When I look back later, the markings form a network, lines and intersections that resemble the mine's layout perfectly. Last night, I stood in my kitchen holding a hammer, staring at the concrete floor. I don't remember picking it up. I only remember the feeling of anticipation, like standing at the edge of something inevitable. I put the hammer down, but the urge didn't fade. It's still there, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. I know how this ends. The mind doesn't want to kill me. It wants to continue. It wants new chambers, new voices, new memories embedded in stone. And I'm the doorway it learned to walk through. If I disappear, they'll say I moved again. They'll say I was unstable. Maybe that's easier. But if you ever hear about construction delays caused by unexplained collapses, or reports of humming beneath city streets,